Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an episode of The Artenders with Mac and Dan. I am Dan, he is Mac.
What's up?
This week, we are looking at a television show, ran a season in 2016, ran its second season in 2019. It was adapted from a one-woman show in 2013. This show is on Amazon Prime Video, and it is titled FLEABAG. It is created, written by, and starring Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Also, if you hear a dog in the background, that's right. If you've been listening for a while, you may know who that is. That is my roommate's dog, Coda. And so occasionally we like to greet her. And so right about now, we'll both say, "Hi, Coda." And now, this was Mac's selection for this week. Before I throw it to you, Mac, and to your reasons as to why you picked this show, I just want to get this out there. This was a joy.
It is. It's a joy. It's an absolute joy. Fleabag is, and really everything that Phoebe Waller-Bridge has ever made.
Or at least have been a part of.
Has been a part of, yeah, right. Yes, Star Wars too, I suppose.
Oh my God.
Yeah, you remember that? So, the reason that I picked this show specifically is that I was watching Killing Eve, which is funny enough is actually the other show that Phoebe Waller-Bridge had a hand in producing and creating and whatnot, right? And so I was really happy with that show, and I started thinking about it and realized that Killing Eve and Fleabag were some of my favorite shows that I've seen in quite a while.
Right.
And I was wondering to myself, why is that? What is it about the stuff that Phoebe Waller-Bridge is a part of that really just gets me going, that makes me so excited to watch it, right? And I started realizing that these two shows have something in common that really nothing else has in common, that I haven't seen in a very, very long time.
Right.
And it's theater specific.
Okay.
You can tell that she is a theater performer and that she comes from theater because
she
agree. Places an outstanding amount of trust in the actor.
Yeah.
And that is something that I just genuinely have not seen really much at all, especially in film. Mm-hmm. But film and TV both. It's just so rare for a writer and a director. Because that looks like two different things, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
For a writer and a director to both actually give the actor time to make their own decisions. So often we talk about how, in theater is a writer-to-actor medium. The writer makes the content or the ideas and whatnot, right? And then and that's like the story is the text.
Because at the end of the day, like the actors are the one telling the writer's story.
Exactly.
Particularly, like there's a heavy emphasis in that, especially with like how often, for example, in productions, like they really, really want you to get those lines. I mean, to a T, right? And to such a point, like it's a very, very finely tuned product, but they want you to keep that product consistent to the script so much of the time.
Exactly, and that's theater. That's theater is writer to actor medium, and specifically in America, in Western culture. Because once you get into like Germany and especially into Asia, then it does start to become more of a director's game. Mm-hmm. But in Western culture, we know theater to be a writer to actor medium. Ultimate trust in the actor. They're the one, from an audience perspective, they're the one that is taking you through the story.
Yeah.
Whereas film is not the case. That's simply not the case. It is a writer to director medium. The writer makes the ideas and the concepts and all that, and they put the story and the words in the text. And then the director, it's their job to tell the story. It's their job to put it in front of you. So you as an audience member, whenever you're watching film or television, yes, the actor is important in the same way that a theater director is important.
And they're still the vehicle of a lot of the storytelling as well.
Oh, absolutely. But whenever you're watching film or television, the director is the one that is ultimately the leader of your story, the leader of taking you through that story, right? So something that is so rare in film and television, because it is a writer-to-director medium, is actually trusting the actor, is actually allowing them the freedom and the time and the space to make their own decisions, to really explore the character and have enough time to understand. And not just like, oh, have they done their homework? Not that type of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, give them time to actually fill out a moment by themselves. A really interesting test, that, if you're curious what I'm talking about, an interesting test is whenever you're watching something, specifically a dramatic scene, not as much in comedy, specifically a dramatic scene where an actor really wants to breathe and, have their own moment. Notice how many times the shot cuts in the scene. Notice how often the camera angle changes. Notice how often you get audio cuts. Because the more and more you see it, that shows you that the less and less the director trusts the actor.
Now, hold on. I have to stop you right there, because I think a really good example of a lot of cuts in a scene and like a jumping back and forth, I would think, is in the second season. It's the very first episode when basically the principal cast is having a big old dinner, right? Like all those characters are having a dinner together, but there are plenty of cuts in that scene. So typically, I think, yes, what you're saying rings true, but I feel like that is an exception to this show, because it's less about, at least in this case, like not necessarily, like it's not representative of them not trusting the actors, but it's the pacing and the storytelling within the scene, right?
Sure. Well, another thing that, and this is, because that was more of a test. Like, if you're ever curious what I'm talking about, that is an easy test to look at.
Yeah.
But in terms of this show specifically, what this show specifically does that I see and am so excited by as a viewer, and also just as an artist, as a theater maker, right?
Yeah.
I see it and I notice all of the times in which there was a moment of silence. And there was a moment of breath, or a moment that I get with the actor where I know as an audience member that it wasn't in the script for them to do all these like micro things, for all these micro expressions. It wasn't in the script for them to take it in this direction or to fill out this breath or this silence in the way that they did. That was the director and the writer allowing the actor to have that much agency over that moment.
I think it speaks to how theatrically inspired this show is. Of course, it's coming from a one-woman show, but I think what you're saying, where those breaths and those moments of silence, and having silence be as much of a piece of dialogue as is the actual words on the page, I think that is one of the most electric things about theater, right? That, so much of the time, particularly when you're watching a good piece of theater, and you get really involved and invested in what the going-ons of the characters are, more often than not, you may very well match the breath pattern of some of the actors, some of the people, some of the characters on stage, right? And so on stage, when there's silence, but you're very actively able to see the process of somebody, of what they're going through in their head, and you can hear their breath so clearly, and it's just one of those things that it feels like right there, I mean, you could just touch them, right? Of course, and that is what is so great about theater, but that sort of idea is so finely translated to the screen of this show. But to speak on that, Mac, do you have a specific example about how that silence operates within a scene?
Absolutely, yeah. So,
you got me really nervous there, I just want to say.
Did you
because
feel
your
like I
eyes...
wasn't gonna...
Well, yes, because your eyes were so big, and I was like, oh no, am I not setting this up enough? I'm doing something wrong. I'm failing.
Am I going to have to fill in the silence? No. I'm here with you. I'm listening. I was listening. So, that actually is a very good segue. Sorry, I didn't even mean to do that.
Coda's having a field day.
Oh, hi, Coda. One of my favorite parts about the show is the actor's ability to listen. And very rarely can you even tell an actor is listening in film and television? You know what I mean?
Yeah, because of how the cuts are done.
Sure.
And like
Oftentimes-
also so much of the time that like somebody is acting to nothing.
Right.
Because like
Right.
that other actor is in the trailer.
Or they have a stand-in, or it's just like a wall. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult.
And they edit it in such a way that it's just kind of muddy, and you're like, I can't really tell.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't bother you because you don't know they're not listening, but you can't tell they are. It's just whatever. But in this show, it's very vividly clear that everyone was actually listening in the scenes that they were a part of.
Yeah.
There were very, very few scenes that just we went to really fast, and like the scenes weren't like 10-second scenes. Each scene was a substantial written theatrical-esque scene.
Right.
And that requires every single moment to be a listening moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is beautiful. But something specifically that I noticed while watching this show and while watching Killing Eve, which I might force you to watch eventually, is that there's this concept in theater that's really hard to translate to film and TV. And it is that it's the reason that we have so much classic work redone over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll ask you, why do you think that it's so important that like so many different people have played Hamlet? Or why do you think it's important that so many different people have, played like these huge roles? Why do we keep seeing it over and over and over again? Not just Shakespeare, but in general.
I think generally it's a testament to the quality of the writing, but it's more so, I think, a director or perhaps a theatrical company is retelling a story because they want to get a specific thing in that story across, right? So you may see like a production of Macbeth that is set during let's just say like the conflict in the Middle East, right?
Yeah.
And like so the directors and everybody involved are trying to say something very, very specific about that. Or maybe like there's a lot of like interfamilial hostility that's like happening and like that's being shown to the public a lot. So maybe you'll see something like a Streetcar Named Desire or like Dinner with Friends,
Sure.
just like stuff like that, right? But there's it's not so much telling news stories and trying to get the themes of those news stories across. It's more about retelling old stories because those themes still apply to today.
Sure. And Macbeth was a lovely example. So, I mean, we went through and watched a million different versions of Macbeth, right? So there's like a Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen and a Michael Fassbender and all these different Macbeths that we saw. And what's so lovely about them is that even though it's the same character, same story,
right,
they are drastically different versions of Macbeth.
And the script doesn't change. Like, there may be some cuts here and there,
Absolutely.
but, like, in terms of additions, next to none, if any. Any.
Exactly. So, even though, with most film and TV, if they had cast someone else, yes, the vibe would have been a little different, but at the end of the day, we would have still gotten the same points across, right? At the end of the day, if you cast like Seth Rogen in The Hangover instead of Zach Galifianakis, yes, it would have been different, but you still would have gotten the same vibes. It would have been the same, general point, right?
Right.
You can really cast you can replace anyone in Hollywood and it'll be fine. That's how it's made.
That is a gross generalization, but I understand what you were trying to say.
Yeah, there's just very little trust, I mean, in the actors in that way. And with Fleabag and with Killing Eve, but we're talking about Fleabag, is that I love it because I really do think that if you were to get a different actor to play each role, really, really that entire character would change. In the same way that we watch Macbeth and all these different versions of these characters really actually do change. And there are actually 100% different versions, and there's like validity in different people wanting to play Macbeth because you want your own interpretation of it. And I really do think that Andrew Scott's Hot Priest is his version, and if we got someone else to play it, it would be entirely different. Not just like a different like general vibe or whatever. The character would have looked different and had different moments, and different things would have shown through. And the same way with Phoebe Waller-Bridge as Fleabag. If they had gotten someone different to play that role, it really would have actually changed. And that's very, very rare in film and TV. So like the moments whenever she breaks the fourth wall, which we're going to have to get into, where she breaks the fourth wall and looks into the camera and makes some funny face. That's not scripted. It's scripted that you look maybe in the camera and say something, but whenever it's just a facial expression or a thought that you watch her have on her face, that's an actor thing. That's not a writer thing. That's not just a director thing. And that's something so rare that I see next to never in film and TV. That makes me so excited. And this is my last point.
Okay.
my last point as to why I think that this is some of the most actor-driven media that I have ever seen.
That is not specifically theater.
That's not theater. Yeah. That on-screen actor-driven media.
Right.
And why it makes me so excited, because that's my favorite part of theater, and that's the thing that I think is missing in film and TV that really brings me back to theater consistently is the trust, is the alive and in the moment feeling, right? That the actor is there to provide. That the director and the writer just can't do that. The actor is the only one that can provide you with that live, real life, in the moment, like right in front of you feeling. And it is that this is my hot take. Get ready.
Oh,
this is my
I don't know what a hot take is. Oh, a sizzle serve.
Thank you. This is my sizzle serve. I really, really do believe this is the only thing I've ever seen, film and TV wise, that every single actor was having a good ass time.
I can't think of a rebuttal at the moment. No, yes, I can. It's going to have to be, and not because I want to like prove you wrong.
Sure, go ahead.
But also this is the only rebuttal that I can think of, and probably the only rebuttal that I'm going to have in my arsenal is a movie that came out a couple of years ago, Knives Out.
Knives Out's good as shit.
Knives Out is a
great.
whodunit, and like, but honestly, like when you are a part of a whodunit that is of the quality of Knives Out, how could one not enjoy being a part of that process?
Yeah, it's fun.
But I think to your point in what you're saying, that it's very rare to come across this sort of electricity and this sort of pure engagement that you can obtain from the actors, and that's popping off the screen. That is few and very much so rare to come by.
Yeah.
You do not see that a lot, period. And so when it finally does happen and you get to experience it as an audience member, it's really enriching. And I think also, I didn't appreciate it at first, but once I finally finished this series and was able to think back on it, and the more I think about this show, I think the more it just gets better. And it's one of the few things.
It's very rewatchable, by the way.
Exactly. And what I was gonna say is that it's certainly rewatchable in such a way that already, like, I finished the show yesterday and I want to watch it again already.
Yeah.
And I don't know another thing that like necessarily does that for me, that once I finish a story, I want to re-experience that story immediately. Like sometimes there is a story, and like the big thing about the story is sort of leaving the past behind us, and what happens and we have to move on. And like sometimes, and those stories can be really good, but part of the experience of those stories is to let that story be. But there was something about this one in particular that it was just a treat to watch Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character, like her progression and her growth as a person and who she is to her loved ones. And even though it's not necessarily her loved ones at first, it definitely grows to be such a case. But I think this show manages to be very, very beautiful. And I also want to mention there's a very deep, enriching audience connection that happens because you are treated as a character in this show. And if
Yeah.
you don't understand what I'm saying, it is because Phoebe Waller-Bridges' character, Fleabag, she's just called Fleabag, but she's never addressed by name. She
Which I love.
she breaks the fourth wall and she communicates with you. She is both she is in these scenes like as a character, but she's also a narrator. It is kind of similar to the very famous example of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right?
Yeah.
Where you have this person experiencing what's going on in these scenes. But you are also, the audience member is also a character. And so you are Fleabag's confidant, essentially. And so the more I think about it, the more it feels like I was actually a part of that experience too. And so the show really, really succeeds, particularly when it's breaking that convention. There are a few ways in how the show does this. The most, I guess not as obvious, but the more frequent, I suppose, of ways was when you would have occasionally these very, very long scenes and Fleabag doesn't address the camera at all. Probably the biggest example of that would be at the very end of the first season, right? Where she's spilling out to the bank manager and it kind of sort of cracks her, right? There's something that cracks, like the straw finally breaks the camel's back. Similar to Jimmy McNulty at the end of The Wire season 3, right? There was something that finally breaks with his character and like them realizing I have to change, right? Yeah. And so much of the show is Fleabag looking at the looking at the camera, addressing you, and it's like, get a load of this shit, right? But in those nearly 10 minutes, she doesn't address us at all.
Yeah.
And so it's kind
and
of
that's one of the longest times that she goes without. Yeah, right.
Exactly. And it's just kind of one of those things that she's finally sort of looking in the mirror, metaphorically speaking, finally in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Where she is forcing herself to confront with herself.
Yeah.
As opposed to using this sort of, literally a device to get away from what she's actually feeling. And then another way that the show breaks this convention, and we'll probably get a little bit more into this later, because I don't want to step on what you're about to say, but it's how the show introduces, you were saying, Andrew Scott's character, the priest, and...
Genius.
You don't... When you have, like, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, like, nobody else sees the camera. It's just Ferris Bueller, right? So it feels like this special connection. But then
God, I love this moment.
The priest notices when Fleabag looks at the camera. So it's a really, really jarring moment when it happens. And so, like, for us as the audience, it's like, you can see us too? Like, but you can't, but he can't necessarily see us. He notices when Fleabag is looking away from the scene. Like, she leaves the scene and she enters a dialogue with us, right? And when he notices that, it's like, oh, that's weird. I'm uncomfortable. But that is also what makes you special. It makes you different, and actually enhances the connection between you and Fleabag. You were going to mention something earlier, but I don't know.
I'm excited. I'm on this now. So,
okay.
And this is something that we call in the biz meta-theatrical storytelling.
What?
Meta-theatrical storytelling.
Meta-theatrical storytelling.
Yeah, that it's not just that it's like a meta moment where it's like, oh, and like we're so aware of the fact that we're in a play or in a story or whatever. It's
right.
It's not just that, and it's not just that you are getting a story where you see him getting closer to her enough to where he feels like they're relating, or where he like they kind of graze hands, something like that. It's not just that. It's both happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Where they're able to use a funny and jarring and wild and conceptual theatrical, meta-theatrical moment where we're very aware, right? And we're breaking all these conventions. And just not that it's also happening, but by doing that, you are telling a story. By doing that, you're getting further, right? So he is... So you're making this huge directorial move and writer move, story move.
Yeah.
And it's serving the relationship and the arc of the characters, which is so smart and hard to do. Sorry, go ahead.
But no, but it's also using, instead of, it's going beyond a device and actually having the audience be a character, right?
The device isn't there just to be a device. It's there for the sake of the story.
There was something about, I'm going to keep comparing it to Ferris Bueller's Day Off because that is the most famous example of the usage of the device. But at least from my experience, I never felt like I was a character in that movie, right? As opposed to in Fleabag, the more I think about it, and certainly in season 2, there are so many times where I feel like a character and I feel like a participant in the story, right? And I think maybe it's partially because of the dramatic storytelling, the nature of this show, but I think it's also something that's really finely well translated from the original sort of writing that was the one-woman show, right? Where you see this, I mean...
Did you see any clips from that?
I saw a few clips. I was unfortunately not able to watch a sort of production. It's only like 80 minutes, but as far as I can tell, it's not very easily accessible online, unfortunately, at the moment. But
it was for like a week.
A little bit, and I think it was primarily at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yes.
But what is very, very good about the translation from stage to screen is what you see a lot in traditional one-man or woman shows, is this communication with the audience and treating the audience as a character, right? That it's not necessarily having a monologue, it's having a dialogue with the audience.
Yeah.
So that is very, very clear in the original sort of form of this writing. And instead of doing the sort of thing where let's use like books, for example, like adaptions of books, like occasionally, or it certainly feels like that whoever the narrator is, or like the character that happens to be the narrator, like they're talking to you, right? And so in so much of the book, it feels like there's a dialogue between you and the narrator in the novel, but you don't hardly see that translation survive, right? You hardly get a narrator when the page is adapted to the screen. But in the case of this, and I think it was a very, very wise decision that really, really paid off in the storytelling, was having that device, that dialogue with the audience survive. And it was sort of the linchpin to kind of how season 2 started. That the big inspiration for season 2 was introducing a character that could see Fleabag have the dialogue with the audience. And sort of having that be the baseline and growing from there actually gives way to a really, really beautiful character relationship that is just a treat to watch, not only because of the writing, but of course because it's Andrew fucking Scott.
Andrew Scott's so freaking good, is he
brilliant.
not?
He's
so
absolutely brilliant.
I cannot think of a better word to describe it. It is exactly brilliant.
And that's not to say like nobody else on the show is fantastic.
Oh,
no,
plenty.
Everybody on the show is
absolutely
brilliant.
But yeah, but those moments were some of the most pivotal and biggest storytelling moments, were Andrew Scott and Phoebe Waller-Bridge together. But that brings me to a very interesting point, and something that I guess I'll use to wrap up the first half of this bad boy, is that I just now realized this as we were talking about it, that it's not a story about changing. I thought it was a story about a person that changes, because every story is about a person that changes.
Right.
It is, the entire first season is watching her simply attempt to make an effort to change.
And she fails.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Right.
That was something that I picked up on, and I think that was probably one of the bigger things that I think season 1 didn't necessarily stick for me. I began to watch it around last year, I think, the first season. And like, it's not long, and I definitely should have stuck with it now, having watched the full thing and am able to like look at it as a whole, the sort of beauty and the storytelling that was the first season. But I think that was the thing that kind of like partially stopped me at first, was that there wasn't necessarily character progression in the sense of like the steady rise or fall, right? That we just saw like a person at work, right? And then it hits her like a brick wall at the very end.
Yeah.
Which I think, in the grand scheme of things, serves the show better.
Yes.
But at first, it took me a second to get into it.
It feels slow because you're not getting the checkpoints that you're used to. You're not getting the, yes, now the story has started. Yes, now we're on our journey. Because it's just her trying, it's almost like an escalator. Like, we're not, we have not gotten on the escalator, gotten to the first floor, and then got up to the second floor, then got up to the third floor.
Yeah.
We're just watching her, like, kind of, like, figure out how to put her foot on and trust the escalator that is not going to start moving too fast. And then she finally gets on the escalator.
Exactly.
By the end of the first season.
Yes, and it's not necessarily, she doesn't really learn anything per se. You just see her navigate through bullshit constantly.
Right.
Regardless of whether the bullshit is from, by herself or from others putting it upon her.
I think Phoebe Bridge would fucking adore what you just said. I think that she would really appreciate that. Because I think she would laugh her ass off at just
But
that.
I didn't appreciate that at first, right? And I don't think that's a ludicrous...
bullshit.
Yeah,
That's
but
so
I don't
funny.
think that's a ludicrous thing to experience of, like, not necessarily liking that at first. But it was certainly one of those things that I wish the first time somebody told me to watch Fleabag was to, like, maybe say, hey, it will seem like nothing is necessarily happening plot or character-wise at first, but I can assure you, like, either these things are going to matter, which they do, but also it is just trust in it. Mm-hmm. And trust in the writing. And I wish I had trusted it at the beginning. And that's on me. And I can't necessarily blame the show. Like, I understand where one would get the idea and the sort of thought process of what I went through. But now, having consumed the full thing, I definitely should have trusted it from the get-go.
I see. Right. And funny enough, that was actually the exact same experience that I had with The Wire. At first, I was like, I don't think anything's happening. And then all of a sudden, I have to go back and rewatch it because I'm like...
Because things were happening and, like, you don't necessarily... Exactly.
Right,
you missed it.
Right.
You missed it, and it was right under your nose the entire time.
Absolutely.
And so it felt like a bunch of nothing. And that's partially the reason why I want to rewatch this show kind of immediately. Is just, like, there were things that I missed. And I know that I missed them because I'm stupid and Phoebe Waller-Bridge is beyond brilliant.
Absolutely.
And
I agree
not
with
even
that.
to talk down to myself. That's just fact of the matter.
It is. It absolutely is. And I would be happy to go into even further analysis and maybe even a little bit of origin story as to how this awesome piece came about whenever we come back from a word from our sponsor. All right, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Now, just let me explain. First of all, it's free. Second of all, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a whole bunch more. And third, now this is really important, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Hear me when I say no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome back to the Artenders with Mac and Dan. So we left off talking about, or teasing, if you will, the... Oh yeah.
Never do that again. I'm gonna stop you right there.
No, don't stop it.
Never. No. I'm not stopping like us recording. I'm stopping you.
Oh.
You need to look in the mirror.
And
that's it.
and
just come to terms with who you are.
Just take it in.
Yeah.
Sure. So we teased a little bit the origin story of some of the concept of Fleabag. So I'm so sorry. I took a big old doo-doo on what you were saying. But what I was gonna say was that it being originally a one-woman show that premiered in 2013. Yes, exactly, right. And so whenever she was asked by producers and by people that had seen the one-woman show, and after they saw it once, just like we have the urge to now, they were like, I need to go see that shit again. So they watched it several times and were like, wait a second. We need to be making this something that is much larger. This could be much more than just a one-woman show that exists and leaves, and that's it. Because they were like, I don't think that anyone else could do a one-woman show like that. So it's not like anyone's going to be taking that script and making it into another one-woman show. It's like, this runs for as long as Phoebe wants to do it, and then it never exists anymore. Yeah. We need to capitalize on this. So they throw a bunch of money at her and are like, go and make your shit, right? And this is the funny thing. Now it's like, okay, it's going to be an actual show, like a series. So I'm going to get characters and I'm going to make them full-fleshed scenes. Even though she acts herself, she acts out scenes with herself.
Correct.
It's not like she's just telling you the story of, or it's not just she's just acting her side of. She's acting both characters, which is cool.
And lines from the one-woman show are ripped and placed and transplanted into the television show.
Right. And you might be able to let us in a little bit more on solo performance, because I only know so much about solo performance, and I know that you, little star, are pretty good at it.
Okay, so hold on. To give context, I just took a class in college. And at the end of the semester, we did our own solo performances, right? But the curriculum in the class was also viewing a lot of solo performances as well. So, like, I mean, some that really, really stick in my head. And a lot of their names are unfortunately escaping me, right? But, like, probably the best example would be Anna Deavere Smith. And if you don't know Anna Deavere Smith, she does a lot of these solo performance shows, but they are sort of research projects, and coming from interviews, and she performs, as these characters from these interviews, right? And there are also plenty of other examples. I mean, like stand-up, like comedy stand-up is the most famous example of a solo performance, right? Yeah. And so, like, one we saw in that class was Hannah Gadsby, Hannah Gadsby.
Hannah Gadsby's so good.
Who is brilliant. The one that we saw was Nanette, which I recommend. But, I think the best example to me is, like, Dave Chappelle, right?
Dave Chappelle's a great solo performance.
But, like, once you realize, like, what a solo performance is, and sort of look at the art of the solo performance, what makes them very, very tricky is that nobody's there to help you.
Yeah.
Nobody is there to assist you. Like, at least when doing this show, you and me, Mac, that if I start drowning all of a sudden in the middle of a take or a thought, you are there to save me, and vice versa. And that has come to fruition sometimes. Maybe you, the audience member, has noticed, and maybe you haven't. It happens, right? But we have each other to lean on, right? But sometimes you may tune into the radio, if people still fucking do that, and go to like an AM show here and there. But I mean, we're like old souls.
True,
is the difference.
Yeah.
But tune into the radio, and there's just like one person talking the entire time, and I think to myself, how do they do that?
Yeah.
And that's kind of sometimes the thought experience that I have to solo performances as well. It's just, how do they do that? Because it's a lot of work. And the solo performance that I did in college was only like 15 minutes or so, when some of these can run up to an hour long. Right, and it's not just jokes, and like stand-up is a whole other beast that is insanely complicated and insanely difficult, and looks easy because they make it look easy, and that's a very similar thing with the rest of solo performances too. But there is a lot of work and love and care and work and blood and sweat and tears and work that goes into those pieces of art.
Yeah. But I have to say, though, I do have to brag on you for a sec, because I was really only emotionally moved by two pieces throughout all of my college experience, and one wasn't even at campus. Like, it was Second Thought, and
Second Thought is a theater in Dallas. Yes.
And the other one was your solo performance.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I cried like a little bitch. It got me. That grandfather shit. Anyway, so Yeah, it's absolutely difficult. Sorry. Reminiscing now.
Huge tangent. Sorry. That's
no.
on me. That's on me.
No, you're absolutely right. It is extremely difficult, and it's strange, and it's a very specific type of medium. So how are you going to translate that onto a series? Yeah. Especially whenever a one-woman show is all about focus and all about the story in your head, and a series and acting in a series is all about listening and being with the person in front of you. How is that going to translate for Phoebe, but also how is that going to translate like the scenes and the content? And it really, really, really does. But she knew that she could not translate it appropriately.
Right.
If she did not have actors that she trusted could turn her words into active text rather than just funny ideas.
And we touched on this kind of a little bit in the first part, but for a lot of these actors in the show, I mean, after all, Phoebe Waller-Bridge created this, version of Fleabag. Of course, she is going to use people that she knows or has worked with before, because Absolutely. Why wouldn't she, right? The biggest example would be her name is Sean Clifford. Yeah. And she plays Fleabag's sister in the show, Claire.
Yes.
And supposedly, they're best friends. They not necessarily grew up together, but they went to school together. They've known each other for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so that relationship on the screen, that even though for so much of the story of the show, Fleabag and Claire do not like each other and are kind of sort of pessimistic towards one another, but the chemistry between the actors is still inherently there.
Yeah.
And it becomes really, really evident when Fleabag and Claire are sharing a scene where they actually like each other, right? And so it's like it's going beyond, because you just generally, you the audience member, you listening right now, the listener, when you look at a piece of art, occasionally you're going to see or hear or watch something that the work of the actor becomes so clear, right? But it's the work of the actor occasionally. Like, I mean, a really good example of an actor that does that is like Daniel Day-Lewis, and the work that he puts into the roles that he does is parallel to none, right? But then occasionally, and once again, we touched on this a little bit in the first part, occasionally you're going to see not only the work from the actors and their raw talent occasionally too, but also just the people themselves, the actors themselves enjoying the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And you get that a lot in this show. You get that particularly with Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Sean Clifford's scenes, whether or not, like I said, they're upset or happy with each other, but it becomes very evident and very clear when in those scenes that they are happy with one another. I mean, in the 4th episode of the first season, when Fleabag and Claire are in this silent retreat, they sort of become closer in that way. They sort of split apart towards the end of that season, unfortunately. But in that episode, they become a lot closer. And that chemistry, I wish I could further articulate and find the words to it and to the experience as an audience member. But I guess just trust me when I say that it becomes really, really clear when you are viewing it. Right. And I think partially it is still when Fleabag is not addressing the camera. That when you have Fleabag, the character, sort of actually actively participating in a scene and sort of ignoring you, the audience, scenes become a lot more electric.
Yeah.
Not only for the character that is Fleabag, but I think also to the Phoebe Waller-Bridge, her experience as well. And that rings true for so much of this cast, and it really, really rings true in the 2nd season with her scenes with Andrew Scott. And a really good example of that is when they're having their scene at the cafe, And Fleabag is showing the priest the cafe for the first time, and just how they're speaking with one another and how they're flowing verbally with one another, and they're kind of it plays a lot more realistic in terms of how conversations work, right? We talk kind of funny on this podcast because that's just how podcasts go, but generally speaking, in conversation, we are stomping all over each other all the time, right? And so that happens a lot in this particular scene, and it's just, you can read the joy off of their faces.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's something that it takes so much trust to actually to trust an actor to come into a project that you've written and that you're starring in and that you're so,
because this is Phoebe Waller-Bridge's baby.
Absolutely.
Like, this is her thing. So of course, why wouldn't she want to bring people that she loves to work with?
Right. And so it's funny,
especially
because
when she has a say in it.
I mean, come on. It's funny because you can tell that between this and Killing Eve, that she has an extensive theater career, both in like super upscale, posh, like higher end theater and underground, like, you know, make it myself DIY type theater that we like to do in basements and shit.
Yeah.
So you can tell that Fleabag is her underground project that she decided to make with all of her posh friends.
Yeah.
With like all of her RSC buddies, all of Royal Shakespeare Company buddies, like Andrew Scott, Bill Patterson, Olivia Colman, all these really famous, well-known, very like high up, upscale theater performers. Ginny Rainsford, another one. Sean Clifford is the best friend, obviously, but is still also a very reputable actor. And it's funny because while that is the case, then Killing Eve is the opposite of that. It is her very well produced, very expensive, very well publicized project with all of her underground theater friends. So it's like people that are going and doing stuff at like the Donmar Warehouse, or like little tiny theaters in London, like Harriet Walter or Fiona Shaw. These tiny little names, or and the only real celebrity on that show is Sandra Oh, who is also known for going and doing underground theater like that.
Yeah.
And it's funny whenever you notice this, and it kind of makes you excited because you're like, oh shit, like that, like they're all buds, like they all know each other already.
This world's really small.
Very.
And we are experiencing that so much as artists, for sure. But
but
it's enjoyable to watch a piece of work, and like their world is really small, and this work is better for it.
Yes. And they use it to their advantage, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it does beg the question, and we've kind of been alluding to it this whole podcast, but do you think this could have happened if it wasn't a one-woman show first? If it wasn't not just a one-woman show, but theater? Do you think that this show could have happened if it wasn't a piece of theater first?
The inspirations and the roots of theatrical performance, to me, because I mean, we're theater artists, right? I can imagine that it doesn't necessarily ring so loudly for people who are not theater artists, but as theater artists, it does, certainly. So would this show have been possible without those roots? I don't think so.
Same.
Because of just where those roots came from.
Yeah.
Right? Like
the breaking the fourth wall thing.
Yeah, the breaking the fourth wall thing, and it's so much more a dialogue with the audience, right? That becomes really, really present from a one-woman show that's done in theater.
Yeah.
You know, because like when doing a solo performance show, there are, I mean, really either two ways to do it. There's one that like you're not really addressing the audience, or like you're being these characters, but the fourth wall is very much so there, or the fourth wall isn't there. Like either you're doing these monologues or you're having a dialogue with the audience, right? You see so much in typical theater that so much of the case it's dialogue between characters on the stage, and then not as often you're going to get a dialogue with the audience. I mean, like a famous example of one doing both is like The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams, but I think what really benefits this show is because it kept the roots.
Yeah.
And when it translated from theater, from the stage to the screen, that Phoebe Waller-Bridge decided, I am going to keep the sort of character of the stage show. And like I said, and like what we've been saying, it aided in the storytelling of this because we felt, the audience, we felt like we were a character and we were an active participant in this show. And I don't think I've ever had an experience quite like this with a television show or movie.
Yes.
That, like, for once, I am not an observer, I am also a participant.
Yes.
That even though I am still observing as a participant, that this character, it feels like this character couldn't be here without me.
Yeah. Wow, that's a very good way of putting it.
That if you took away Ferris Bueller's Day Off's narration, same movie. That movie would not be any different. If you take away Fleabag's narration in this show,
it's a very boring show.
It's a completely different show.
Yeah.
Because of how important that relationship is treated.
Yeah.
And of course, like, that device is, really delved into, particularly in the second season with the priest. But how important that relationship is valued to the development of Fleabag as a character.
Yeah. And also now that we're getting into an era of just human culture and social culture where most problems that we face are internal. There are very few problems that we face that are, there are very few problems that we face that have not been addressed already. Most things have been talked about in theater or film or TV that are external, that are problems that one person can have with another person, right? And we've touched on racism, we've touched on sexism, and we've touched on all these things. And yes, it's important to keep talking about those things, but in terms of new or not done before, really the untouched landscape looks a lot like internal conflict. And so how do you effectively handle internal conflict in a way that's actually interesting and not boring? And this is some of the most interesting internal conflict, to the point where that's the whole story. The whole story is internal conflict.
Yes.
And it actually adds, right? And another thing that we were talking about is, I definitely don't think this could have happened without it being theater first, because it really uses some of my favorite parts of theater that film and TV just simply don't have. And I've always had this question in the back of my mind of, is that ever going to be able to translate? Because if it doesn't, then theater's not going anywhere. And I'm definitely going to keep going to theater and preferring theater.
Yeah.
Because I love the connection that I have to the actor. I love the trust that I and the writer and the director all have to put in this one performer in front of us to really actually lead us through the story. I love all that stuff, right? And I've always wondered, like, am I ever going to get that feeling of, mysticism, or also, just like you were saying, a feeling like I needed to be there watching it for it to happen? Am I going to get that feeling in film and TV ever in my life? And not totally with Fleabag, but I'd say a good 50%. Like, I'm getting there, and that makes me really excited. That gives me a lot of hope for potential things in the future. We talk a lot in directing, a lot. We're used to, I suppose, about how oftentimes there's this kind of joke that if you're going to see some like crappy off-Broadway theater that is like experimental and devised and this strange thing, what you're going to see is going to suck now, but is going to be the only thing they're doing in movies in about 20 years.
Yeah.
And
because what you're saying is a concept.
Right. That you're seeing all of the new edge stuff, that you're seeing all of the exciting original shit.
That's actively being workshopped.
And even though it's awful right now, it's an interesting idea, and it's being fostered, and it's being sculpted in off-Broadway theater, or in this like tiny basement theater that no one really gives a shit about right now. But that's going to turn into a very large concept eventually. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, Hamilton would have been laughed off a stage 30 years ago, but after a lot of sculpting and after a lot of figuring it out, it is now the most popular musical of all time.
Yeah.
Or at least of the past, like, 50 years maybe, which I suppose is pretty much all time anyway. And And that's something that I find really enjoyable about Fleabag is that it uses that, right? It feels like it came straight from experimental theater to the screen rather than to Broadway. It's coming to the screen now, and it is actually effective.
And I think also partially to speak on the sort of internal conflict and external conflict too, and the relationship between Fleabag and the audience, is that in that dialogue, right, you think that you're getting insight into Fleabag's internal conflict when that is purely not the case, right? So you're getting a lot of her internal thoughts and like what she's thinking in that moment, but she's not expressing them out loud to her like scene partner per se.
Yeah.
But you're just getting her internal thoughts and not actually the internal experience. I think is,
yeah.
But I think that's what also partially really enriches that character relationship between us and Fleabag. And it's kind of one of those things that it being on the screen and it being told in the manner that it is wouldn't really kind of be the same way, or maybe it would be different. Like, I kind of want to see, like, I want to see a stage production of the first and second season of Fleabag. Like, there's a part of me, right? Because now I'm just curious, how would that translate back? I just find it really interesting, but I know obviously that shouldn't happen. Like, as an artist, like, I'm able to say, like, that shouldn't happen,
Sure.
you know? And also, like, as an artist, like, as much as, man, what if they did a third season? Like, I'm also able to say they shouldn't do a third season because there's sometimes, like, a story ends and it should just end. And, like, the fact that we got even a second season is, like, a miracle in the first place. But I think they were able to sort of tell a story and make the experience here both profoundly unique and still have it be inspired by theater. But I think, yeah, it's very much so possible that we are sitting here and we are discussing the sort of saplings and sort of maybe predicting, maybe looking towards the future of, we could very well see TV and movies that go a lot closer to this style, right?
Yeah.
There's so much of the time that, like, something adapted from theater doesn't really work that well on the screen.
Yeah.
You know, I think, like, you touched on this. We talked about the Macbeths that we saw, and we've mentioned it in a few episodes before, but we saw a bunch of different versions of Macbeth, but those still feel inherently theatrical performances, but it felt like they were brought down from being on screen.
Yeah.
As opposed to Fleabag, which was enhanced by being on screen. A different experience from the stage show, but also the stage show was a one-woman show, and then Phoebe Waller-Bridge chose to do something specifically different with the screen adaptation.
That's exactly right.
And it really aided the cohesive storytelling and the experience, making them both unique but special.
That's exactly right. It's a matter of making them different and being aware that they're supposed to be different. That film is a vastly different medium than theater, and so if you're translating from one to the other, you need to be aware of that. And with the Macbeths, they just simply were not. They weren't. They didn't give themselves the grace of changing that around, and that's a shame. That really is a shame. That you need to be aware that, especially whenever you're doing some sort of classical text,
right?
That's not going to directly translate to the film. You're going to have to cut and maybe even rewrite some things and figure out how to take that and put that on film.
And the extent of sort of theatrical inspiration in film and television happens here and there, but the only examples that I can think of are when it's primarily movies, and these are movies that are really only set for the most part in one location. The only examples I can think of are Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs and The Hateful Eight.
Sure.
That they're essentially their own little whodunits, that the majority of those films just take place in one location. And that is the only thing that I can think of that, like, these roots are theatrically based.
Yeah.
That the emphasis of having most, if not all of the action be in one location.
Yeah.
That's theatrically based, and the roots are very clear. But it's enriching to watch something that is different, that is still has those roots, but in a very, very different way. And instead the roots is in the sort of storytelling as opposed to the setting.
Right. Well, that's a big thing they do in a lot of classic movies, and that is really interesting to look back at, is because most... Like Rope. I love Rope.
Hitchcock, right?
Yeah, Hitchcock. A lot of Hitchcock. I was literally about to mention Rope. I'm so mad that you
shit,
said that.
I mean, is essentially a stage play. Like the camera,
it is.
It doesn't even change
it's cool
cameras,
too.
right?
No. Well,
but it's like
there's
one
cut.
set.
Yeah.
You know.
There's only one, I think, cut in the entire movie. Other than that, it's just straight. It's just the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And but all real classic film directors that you see had to have been trained in theater, and they use a lot of that influence. It's cool to watch. I want to dive into my heady play.
Oh ho ho!
Bringing this segment back.
Oh, bring in the jingle.
Oh, we need to make some sort of imaging for heady play.
What do you think? Do you think, my friend, heady play was in last week, and you think I would edit an episode with no imaging?
I'm just making sure. Okay, so.
But you know what I liked about that? That it was that it just showed me you don't listen to her episodes.
Oh my gosh, shush your mouth.
No, go ahead with your heady play.
It's just that maybe...
This happy music is still going, by the way.
Oh, it better be.
I'm not going to look at you.
I'm so sorry. Heady play.
What is heady play?
Heady play is whenever we notice something about the thing that we have just viewed or consumed that is specifically heady play, a smart move, a smart decision. And if they'd done something else, it probably would have been pretty dumb.
Yep.
Heady play of them to have put Andrew Scott in the end in the position where he rejects her.
Oh my god, we haven't even discussed
character
relationships hardly.
Especially, barely even the story, yeah.
Because we were saying the linchpin of the second season was the fact that somebody can see Fleabag interact with the audience. And that character is the priest, but the thing is about the priest, it's also Fleabag's love interest. You see the conflict there already.
Yeah. And the heady play of them making sure that he rejects her because the story would not have been complete or proper or Fleabag-esque or satisfying. And it's weird because yes, it would have been satisfying if they ended up together, but it is much more satisfying intellectually knowing that they did not, because that is exactly what was supposed to happen. That is how it was supposed to be made, and they did a very good job of tricking us that wasn't the case. But goodness gracious, it landed. It really the plane landed, and it leads me to my gold medal, which is. As you all know, us saying that something was fantastic or maybe our favorite part, whether that be a specific character or moment or whatnot. For me, my gold medal was It Will Pass. It Will Pass was just that line was...
Can you give context to that line?
Yeah, of course. Was fantastic. It was pretty much the last moment where... Fleabag and the priest are sitting on a bus stop bench, and they're talking about you know, the fact that they're probably not going to be together or whatever, and she starts crying, and she's like, "It's just, I love you," right? And every piece of media you've ever seen in your entire life trains you to believe that he's going to say, "I love you too," or something along those lines. And instead, he just says, with all of the grace that Andrew Scott can muster, "It will pass."
And it's like, it's heart-wrenching.
It
but
is.
It's beautiful in the same way, and really just fantastic. But... oh my god, it's a really great moment. I need to rewatch this show already.
It's so good.
It's so good.
And I know that you also have a gold medal, yeah?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, like, that moment is incredible. I don't know, like, how the show ended was perfect.
Yeah.
It's perfect. It was a perfect ending
Cannot
to the
agree
show.
more.
That
And that's rare. It's hard to do.
and it ends with them not being together because that makes sense because of like who they are and what they believe in and their relationships in their lives, you know. And particularly with the priest and his relationship with God, right? And like he can't give that up, right? Like he can be with Fleabag, but it's never like that relationship will never be alive to such a point where it can stay alive, right?
Yeah.
If I were to put a diagnosis on it, but and then with the series ending with Fleabag waving goodbye to the camera and sort of like looking at it with finality, like I have to walk my own path,
Yeah.
and I can't have you as my confidant anymore. Like I need to be my own person, and maybe like some of it, and probably it's me, you know, putting 2 and 2 when the 2 is actually a 3, is like her realizing that like we brought her down or we brought her back, right? That we were holding her back, rather that like the most enriching experiences for her is when we weren't an active participant in the scene with her, when she was forced to not involve us. And maybe those were the realest moments for her. Once again, maybe I'm reading into it. I kind of want to watch the show again because now I'm like, I just thought of that theory on the spot. I'm like, oh, you know what? You know what, Danny? Maybe. So, but with that being said, we haven't even talked about this person. We said her name, but we haven't even talked about this person and the quality of her acting and how much of a goddamn Christmas treat she is in this show.
It's so good, yeah.
My gold medal is for Olivia Colman. I love this woman. Woo! I've not seen enough of her work. The most that I've seen her in is, we talked about it last week, Broadchurch. And she's incredible in that. And to see her be this sort of really, really kind individual and then translated into this volcano in this show, this dormant volcano in this show, passive aggressive all the time, but it's so good because of just how subtle she does everything, and she lets the work, you know, breathe, and she doesn't put anything on top of it. Meaning that she's not like overacting or anything, because it's very easy for her as the godmother, who is actually marrying Fleabag and Claire's father. It's very easy for her character to be over the top, but never is she really. And what makes her so over the top is the fact that she doesn't have to work and she doesn't have to do anything. That like her presence alone is enough to just drive a nail into somebody's chest, and
she does,
and she knows that.
Yeah.
And so just kind of like allowing that sort of seethe under, and just like her saying in a scene, you know, it troubles me so much that I can't get the image out of my head of you just suffering in that cafe. I mean, I feel so bad for you. All I see in my head is you suffering in that cafe. I wish I could just do something. And then she
That's
smiles.
So good. Oh, God.
And like, I don't want this gold medal to detract from the fact that everybody from this show should get a gold medal.
True.
Like, one person we haven't talked about at all is Brett Gelman, who plays Claire's husband, and he's the biggest piece of shit, and he does an incredible job on the show for it, right? But and it's a perfect example of he is exactly what that character needed, and that speaks to so much of the casting of the show and the performances and the amount of trust that was placed into the actors of this show. And so it really pays off in the end for the experience as the viewer.
So now that we've, you know, really taken this journey down Fleabag Lane, I'm wondering, Danny, any final thoughts from you in terms of just the overall show and, you know, what we can take away from it, and maybe how it might inspire you, maybe how it might you know, add to your artistic hunger for the future?
Firstly, you don't realize how good the first season is while you're in it. You realize how good it is when you finish it, and then you realize how amazing it is when you finish season 2.
Yeah.
I want to make that very clear. So, if for whatever reason you're still listening and you haven't watched this show, just sit yourself down, It's not very long at all. Treat them as movies, I would say. Treat them as 2 separate movies instead of 2 separate seasons of television. And just enjoy the ride that this show puts you on. There's a lot more under the surface that from the first viewing, it's hard to see and it's hard to articulate. But I really want to watch this show in the near future again. Now, with that being said, also, it makes me really excited about future work, not only in the theatrical space, but also on the screen, and how primarily the sort of devices and the storytelling and how theater is done, how that can be translated into screen, where it's still a uniquely screen-based experience, but with the roots from theater. So I'm really looking forward to more pieces of art that is like that. And so it makes me really excited to sit back, watch, and experience in the future. And it makes me certainly hungrier as an artist because, of course, you and I both being artists, we always want to be on the ride for the next big thing because the next big thing is always very, very exciting. So it's just exciting to then watch something that you say to yourself, this could very well be the very next big thing.
Yeah.
So it's cool to watch. What about you, Mac?
I'd say a similar thing, just in terms of I am so excited to see more and more theatrical elements being used in film and TV. I'm so excited that all of the ideas that I had that I had a decent time creating in theater, any ideas that I had that are new or things that I haven't seen yet that I want to start seeing more and more, I'm realizing those can probably be translated just as well to film and TV, as long as I'm willing to listen and to edit in the same way that Phoebe Waller-Bridge does.
Yeah.
I think that this is a huge learning show. As we saw, we talked about just what we learned from the show pretty much for 99% of this podcast. We don't talk about the story for like a split second. It was mainly just talking about how much we learned from just consuming the show.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating, the whole thing.
We were so caught up on the device of this show because of how well it did it. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't talk much about the plot per se.
Even though it was stunning.
Yeah, even though the plot is really, really good and it's really thoughtfully well put together. But what had us really on the edge of this discussion was not necessarily the story being told, but it was particularly how the story was told.
Correct. So yes, that is where I think I would leave Fleabag, and I definitely return to it from time to time, and I highly encourage, if anyone has seen Fleabag, to rewatch. If you haven't, obviously you got to watch it. It's stellar. It really is stellar. The whole series is, and just Phoebe Waller-Bridge in general. We need to be watching out for her because she's coming.
Is it a sizzle serve to say that I'm glad that's only 2 seasons and it's not going to be renewed? Probably.
No, I think that makes sense. I think we got exactly how much we deserved and how much we needed from the show.
Because there's so many times television goes on for too long
that
or
wrong.
like loses
BBC is usually
its
good about that.
identity. Yeah.
BBC is very good about that. Yeah. So, sir, I'm safely assuming what we're watching next week. We're gonna have to.
The Sopranos.
Fuck you.
The Wire season 5.
Sure.
We are finishing The Wire. It's been a journey.
That epic odyssey.
Oh my god! But I haven't watched an
I haven't
episode
either.
yet. I'm so excited.
Me too.
And it's also really nice to, look at this series of Fleabag and then be able to finish The Wire next week and just really take in just 2 fantastic series of television.
Yeah.
What a joy.
Thank you.
You want to kiss?
Let's just fucking make out.